David Katz, you're so distinguished in your analysis, and you bring such a rich history of work in the federal government as a lawyer. And I'm wondering if you can speak to what's happening with this Emil Bove. Emil Bove was a Trump attorney, one of his personal attorneys. He's an election denier. I just want to say, I mean, so he's really a staunch Trumpist, and now he is being considered for a lifetime appointment to a federal appeals court. He's going through a process. This is a confirmation process during which he is going through back and forths in the Senate. And one of the things that is being talked about, and I actually want you to see a bit of what Adam Schiff and he were speaking about. One of the things that's being talked about is a desire on his part to make a deal, essentially, with the mayor of New York, a quid pro quo. You do this and we'll do that. We'll drop federal charges if you'll open, essentially, the gates of New York to our immigration policy and not get in the way of our ICE agents. Play a little bit for David, if you would.
Can I say one thing to help introduce it? Mark, can
Please,
I say one thing to help introduce it? People who don't watch the show or watch me every Thursday, I worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office with Adam Schiff. I've watched his career ever since the late 80s. I'm a huge admirer of his, and this is one of his masterpieces of interrogation and colloquy.
Go ahead.
Repeatedly urging what amounted to a quid pro quo, that you admonished one of the lawyers in the room to stop taking notes. Is that true?
I don't believe I instructed that attorney to stop taking notes. I did remark on the fact that he was taking extensive notes, yes.
And why did it concern you that he was taking notes of that meeting?
Because at that point in the meeting, we were discussing who was responsible for media leaks, and I was making the point that only the prosecutors had created an extensive record that could support detailed leaks.
And you were concerned, were you, that information about this potential quid pro quo might become public? Was that the concern?
I've explained that there was no quid pro quo.
Will you provide the notes of that meeting, which you, according to the U.S. attorney, instructed be collected at the end of the meeting?
I think a member of my staff may have given that instruction outside my presence, and I defer to the committee and the executive branch on records requests and how those should be handled.
Well, I would request that we seek these records, which go to the truthfulness or lack of truthfulness of this witness. There's a reason why, if I may, my colleagues have gone over at least as much as this. There must be a reason why prosecutors quit rather than following orders from you they considered unethical. There must be a reason why prosecutors complained about you in your own office, why defense attorneys complained about you in your own office, why the judge in the case involving the dismissal of the charges in New York said everything here smacks of a bargain. You testified earlier that the objective evidence overwhelmingly made it clear that it was not a bargain. That there must be a reason why everyone disagrees with you, Mr. Bove, and people feel it necessary to give up a job they love at the Department of Justice and quit because they won't go along with what they consider unethical and immoral orders from you. There must be a reason why that is so true of so many, and this court needs to get to the bottom of it. I yield back.
Thank you,
May I make
Senator
a parliamentary inquiry?
Yeah. So, David, I wonder if you can, of course, remark on that, but talk about the quid pro quo, maybe. And I just wanted to fill in that detail. They keep talking about the quid pro quo. That's this for that. You do this, and we'll do that.
Well, there are kind of two quid pro quos, right? First, you get into Mayor Adams, who is the sitting mayor of New York. He seems to have almost no chance of getting reelected right now. It looks like he'll run again, but this fellow, Mr. Mamdani, the socialist in New York, who, by the way, if you want to discount anything I say about him, he and I went to the same high school, the Bronx High School of Science. So I'm a huge fan of Mamdani, who won this really earth-shattering victory.
I'd love to talk to you more about that. He's an intriguing guy, but go ahead.
He really is an intriguing guy.
This is the mayor of New York you're seeing a picture of right now. You're seeing a picture of the current
very young and
mayor.
dynamic.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll get back to Adams. So Adams wins the mayoralty. Before that, he's the Brooklyn borough president. So the indictment against him is that he traded favors, that he, Mayor Adams, when he was Brooklyn borough president, that he traded favors with the Turkish government in exchange for first-class airfare, all kinds of perks and things that he got from the Turkish government in exchange for him putting pressure on the fire department to green light a consulate in New York City that Turkey wanted to open. He was indicted on those charges, and those charges were pending as of the time Trump comes into office. Mayor Adams fashions himself as a big fan of Trump, someone who wants to talk to Trump, someone who wants to help Trump, sick ICE agents on people in New York City, something that Adams and the administration there in New York City had not done before. They'd resisted doing anything like that, as they had mainly around the country not allowed these ICE agents to be sicked on poor working people at car washes and nannies and so forth. But now he shows a receptivity to that, and he says that he's being really singled out for these corruption charges in federal court because he opposed Biden and the Biden administration on the migrants who went to New York. Supposedly, he told Biden it was a bad idea, stop sending these migrants. New York City couldn't afford it. And his story is that he was retaliated against. If that's really a story, you can go present that in federal court and say that you were selectively prosecuted. All of a sudden, Bove shows great interest, as does Trump, in this story, and decides that they're going to dismiss the charges. Now, they want to hold this sword of Damocles over the head of the sitting mayor by dismissing the case without prejudice, which means that they could always refile it. They could keep him dangling on tenterhooks. So the prosecutors who were bringing that case against Mayor Adams, it hadn't gone to trial yet, quit one after the other. They said, I'm not signing this. I'm not doing anything like this. It's a little bit like what happened out here in Los Angeles, just to bring it a little closer to home, with a police officer who was found guilty by a jury. And then there were 3 or 4 prosecutors out here in my old office, Adam Schiff's old office, the Central District of New York. This has become a thing in both of those districts. It was a thing out here in this district. And then they finally found an assistant U.S. attorney named Rob Keenan who would sign the paperwork out here. And they eventually found somebody in D.C., I think in the public integrity section, who would sign the paperwork. But this was all at Bove's doing. So that's the second quid pro quo. There's Adams' alleged quid pro quo, which he never is going to have to face charges on with the Turks. And then there's the quid pro quo that allegedly was made between Bove and Trump, that if Mayor Adams would play ball with them, especially on immigration, they would dismiss the charges. All of this after it was finally a motion to dismiss that was signed by Bove and by this flunky of his, after 5 or 6 different assistant U.S. attorneys had resigned. And that's what Senator Schiff was just referring to. It went to federal court, and the federal judge said, my God, it looks like there was some kind of quid pro quo here. It looks like something kosher. This looks like this whole thing wasn't kosher, but what power do I have with the separation of powers? I'm a judge. The executive branch prosecutes. If they don't want to prosecute anymore, I can't make them prosecute. But the only thing I can do after appointing a special counsel to advise him, the judge, the only thing that I can do is I can make them dismiss with prejudice. So that was the way it was. So Mayor Adams was dismissed with prejudice, no sword hanging over his head, of course, destroyed Adams's prospects of reelection. So that's what Schiff is referring to. And just to finish the point, there are meetings about this. There's meetings, and they're trying to stonewall, which is unbelievable because he wants to be a lifetime appointed federal judge. But at the same time, he wants to stonewall. That's what Senator Whitehouse was saying, and hide behind all these privileges, which whether they apply or not, if you want to apply these privileges, that's very nice. And if they're legal, that's even better. But if you want to be an appellate judge, you shouldn't be able to use them as a shield. So this federal judge may actually go down, Mark.
So you're saying then, in conclusion, he may not get this judgeship.
It's the story that we talk about on everything. He's 4 Republican votes away from not getting this judgeship. And, you know, Mark, it always seems to come down to the same thing and to the same usual suspects. And you just think, you know, this is a very strong allegation. This is not just Schiff saying so or asking some very pointed questions. There's a whistleblower. He's a longtime distinguished Department of Justice attorney who sat in on this meeting. He has said under oath and in a whistleblower complaint that this Bove said those things. It's also very suspicious that Bove wanted to make sure all the notes of the meeting were collected from all the participants. And of course, meetings like that tend not to be taped, so you don't have a tape of them, but you have about as strong evidence as you could have. You have an under oath statement by a distinguished Department of Justice attorney who was fired over this thing, and they could make up a whole lot of nonsense why he was really fired, but apparently they haven't done that. And so you have to believe that he's lying about it for no apparent reason, that he didn't go along with this, the whistleblower, for no apparent reason. None of this makes any sense except that it's true that Bove did say, just F the judges. If the judges don't agree with what you want to do, just F the judges. The last thing I'd comment on, because I'm from that generation where no one said the F word, even in quoting somebody. We've now had Trump and Schiff say the F word quite a few times in the last week. Maybe it will become standardized, normalized.
Yeah, I don't give a flying F if they use the F word, but I do care about them ignoring court orders. And let's just be clear about what that court order was. He was speaking about court orders that would demand that the deportations halt unless there was due process. Remember, early on in the deportations, there was the scooping up of all of those people, sending them off, many of them by mistake to El Salvador. They were Venezuelans, supposedly. And he, Bove, supposedly, again, in this whistleblower report, among other things, said, F the court order. These deportations continue. That's what this was about, David.
Yes, this was also about the famous flight that left from Texas. And so there were some questions by Schiff if whether he told the people at the meeting, act stupid with that oral order, defy the oral order. Every lawyer in their right mind knows that when a judge says, do not do such and such, you can't go out and do it 10 minutes later and argue that, well, I didn't have a written order. Because the written order ended up taking 20 minutes or 30 minutes to issue. You can't go right outside of it and do the exact opposite of what a judge just told you to do and say, well, it was just an oral order. I was waiting for the written order. That's the position that the Department of Justice took. They apparently took it under the advice of this fellow Bove. And let me say something else that's so remarkable about this case. You know,
well, just let me just remind people before you say that Bove was Trump's personal attorney, involved in the 34 felonies, the ones you've heard about, the ones he was convicted of, et cetera. That's who this guy was. And Trump appointed him to a supervisory role in the Justice Department when Trump won the election and became president again. So that's where he is now. And now, of course, he's going for the judgeship. I just wanted to remind everybody who he was and where he came from. Go ahead.
No, I want to be clear. You know, JFK appointed one of his law professors, I think, to the federal bench. And any of my clients, whoever get in that position, that they can help me get appointed to the federal bench, more power to them. But to say it's unusual is beyond belief. Now, I don't hold it against Bove. I've heard enough that I would never vote to confirm him in a million years. But I do not hold it against him that he was Trump's criminal defense attorney. My understanding is that as his criminal defense attorney, in that role, he didn't do anything wrong. He advocated zealously for Trump, so I don't hold that against him. What's sort of remarkable, just if Trump really wanted to get him on the Court of Appeals, was that he took that interim job at the Department of Justice, because it seems like if he'd have gone straight from being his lawyer, did a great job. We need to appoint private practice lawyers. Not everybody has to be a district court judge or a government official first. I think he probably would have made it, but I think now, because he has such a terrible record, really, I think of obstructing justice, of telling people at those meetings to do things that were completely inappropriate for anybody who wants to be a judge. I think that his attempt may not make it. And just so people understand, because they hear about federal judges, remember there was the tariff thing, and there was some court of international trade nobody had heard about. And we're always saying a federal judge stayed this, and some other bunch of federal judges overturned that. And there are three levels. There's a trial court. Okay, that's the district judges. I clerked for a distinguished district court judge in Washington, D.C. He went on to be the chief judge. That meant he was still a district judge, but he was chief among the district judges in that particular district, Washington, D.C. We're going to talk about the District of Maryland. I hope we'll get a chance to do that. And Trump just suing the entire district court. That's a new one. And then there's this level of appellate judges. The country's divided geographically. It starts with the first, that's the oldest area in New England. It goes into the second, which is New York, the stock market cases, the Southern District of New York, New York City. And then you get to the third. The third is New Jersey, Pennsylvania. It's that area. It's right next to New York City. For all I know, Bove, lives right there in New Jersey across the river from the Second Circuit, because he was an assistant U.S. attorney before he was the criminal defense attorney for Trump. He was an assistant U.S. attorney, the same job I had, same job Schiff had in New York City. So he does have that in his background. That's why I say I think he would have made it as a federal appellate judge. The Third Circuit has two really interesting people who've served on it. One was Trump's sister. I don't know if you remember that fiasco, and she eventually had to resign when the niece started to write these things about what happened with the estate, how come I didn't get my money, claimed she was swindled by a bunch of people, including Trump and the Third Circuit judge. So there would have been a judicial inquiry, which she, the judge, Trump's sister, curtailed by resigning from the bench, the Third Circuit. And the other famous person that we associate with the Third Circuit is Alito. And of course, that's one of the fears with Bove, that these appellate courts can be feeders to the U.S. Supreme Court. And as much as loose cannon down there in Southern Florida is lusting for that job, she ain't getting it. If Bove somehow gets on the Third Circuit, he's fairly young. People think that toward the end of the term, either Alito or Thomas would resign if they have a Republican majority, and they'd make way for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Bove. So people need to really watch this one and watch Bove not getting to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals.
All right, now moving on. I want to ask you about the Supreme Court green light to continue to deport non-citizens to a third country, someplace other than the country from which the non-citizen arrived in our country, the United States. And they can do this with little or no notice, or even for an opportunity to contest their removal. Can you speak to this? This is a Supreme Court decision.
Right. Well, this was another 6-3, what we've gotten used to with the U.S. Supreme Court. Supposedly, it doesn't decide the merits, as I understand it. This case arrived in the posture that these people were saying, in the interim, give me some relief. In the interim, don't send me to South Sudan. My understanding is that the flight landed in some kind of a base, and then from the U.S. military base in South Sudan, they're supposed to go to some South Sudan hellhole, one of them to rival the one in El Salvador, that hellhole that we paid $6 million so that the world's coolest dictator, in his own description, would treat these people terribly down there. This is part of Trump's, just to digress for a second, this is part of Trump's cruelty. This is part of Trump wanting people to know this. The first term, it was, you'll be separated from your children, and it'll be awful if you come here. Be deterred. And this one is, you'll be sent to some horrible country that you don't know anything about, to some hellhole over there, self-deport. That's exactly what the message is. That's what this is all about. Trump's cruelty writ large throughout the world, and he hopes to deter people in that way, rather than through the normal lawful processes. So the question right now is, do they go from this U.S. military base back to the United States, because the stay would be in effect that until the case is decided on the merits, they have a right not to be sent to a third country without a hearing? Or do they go from the U.S. military base in South Sudan to the hellhole prison? And the U.S. Supreme Court says 6-3, you go to the hellhole while you wait for this case to be decided on the merits. The merits are whether you get a hearing before a judge here in this country before you get sent to a country where you reasonably fear torture and mistreatment. And in the interim, no, you don't get that hearing. And you wonder if the U.S. Supreme Court really thinks the balance of equities, if they really think the irreparable harm is somehow to the government, if they don't think there's irreparable harm for being sent to those hellhole prisons, how are they ever going to decide the merits in favor of these people who are getting deported? People have to understand, you do not have a right to be sent to the country of your choice. You don't even have a right to be sent back to your own country. That surprises people. But you do have a right not to be sent to a place where you'll be tortured, okay? Or where your rights will be violated beyond your rights of being detained there, probably. But it's like a torture thing. It's like a mistreatment thing. And you have a right to go in front of the judge and say, they have a record of torturing people. Don't send me to South Sudan. There's a civil war going on there. How are they going to protect me in custody? They can't protect their own people from anything. I'm going to be just killed along with everybody else if you send me to this hellhole country. Look at the civil war they're having. So far, these people have not had a right to present that to a judge. The merits of the case are whether they have a right to present that to a judge, not a jury, but a judge on an expedited basis before they get sent to places like South Sudan. And the answer is right now, 6-3 from the U.S. Supreme Court. No, they don't get that interim relief.
Is it significant that the district judge had ordered an injunction prohibiting the removal of these non-citizens to third countries? Is that noteworthy in any way, or that's just, that's why it's appealed to the Supreme Court, I guess, because
that's why it's appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and that stay is being dissolved. You would think, again, somebody in the administration, you watch the whole thing with Iran and you think, are there any adults in the room, on something so important as we just went to war, and we have people like Hegseth and I don't know, all the other nincompoops who are around there. And you wonder, do we have anybody in charge of something so important? And at the Justice Department, you wonder, do they have anybody with any sense of the law, the rule of law, and what's going on? Why do they have these fights? I mean, there's no constituency in America. There's no MAGA base who thinks that people ought to be sent to third countries where they'll be tortured. The idea that it's like taking people away from their children. There was no base that thought that mothers should be taken away from their children. I think somebody won the Pulitzer Prize with that photo of the 3-year-old who's screaming at her mother's side because the 3-year-old is being separated from her mother. That's just cruelty. That's not what America's all about. We're a charitable country, and the MAGA people are charitable people. As they start to get this, and you think that the Department of Justice would just avoid it and say they've all had a hearing and some judge has said they're not going to be tortured in that place. And if they're going to be tortured in a place, we didn't send them to South Sudan or some other place where they'd be tortured. They're still unpleasant places that you get to, and they can hold you in custody. One last thing, they sent a whole bunch of Mexicans down to Guatemala, I guess thinking that would be something that would scare them from crossing the border again. And the Guatemalans, as I understand it, said, you didn't give us any notice. We didn't know these people. The flight landed in Guatemala with all these Mexicans. My understanding is Guatemala put them all on a bus and sent them back to Mexico. And that's what a lot of these third countries are going to be. We don't want to be in the middle of this. What do we need this for? Okay. They arrive in Kosovo, and what are these people all doing in Kosovo? And they send them on to the countries that they're actually from. That's been a lot of what's really happened on the ground. But of course, Trump wants the impact, right? The impact. And part of it is absolutely racist. They're going to be sent to some hellhole in Africa, and hope that makes an impression on Latin Americans not to come here. I mean, I hate to say that, but I'm into Trump's way. Like David K. Johnston, we do try to read Trump's mind a little bit, and his mind is very easy to read on this one when he sends people to South Sudan in the middle of a civil war, and it's a black country, and nobody sent there is black.
This administration has been gratuitously cruel and deliberately ruthless in this whole deportation scheme. And you're right, as it sets in, as these images get out there, even to MAGA world, I think it may not sit well, but the damage is being done in a heartless, stomach-turning way. I want to ask you about...
Mark, one last thing, Mark. I think that the people, remember, they were supposedly rounding up the criminals out here in L.A. Oh, ICE was very unpopular, and they were
at the car wash. That's where the criminals hang out. Yeah.
I think 5%, they now have statistics, 5% of the people, something like that, have a criminal record. 95% are just nannies, people working at the car wash, people keeping our economy going out here in Southern California.
The construction business, the gardening business, the restaurant business.
That's the government stats. 5% have a criminal record only.
I got to move you to the Maryland situation. This is wild. The Trump administration announcing this week that they are filing a lawsuit against all 15 federal judges in Maryland over this order blocking the immediate deportation of migrants, challenging their removals. And this is a fight with the federal judiciary over the executive powers of the president, in this case, Donald Trump. And to sue all 15 federal judges in Maryland is, I've got to think, it's unprecedented.
The judges usually have lunch together. They did that in Washington, D.C., and you, with law clerk, you could kind of glimpse all the judges were going in there around 12:05 to have lunch together, and it was a sanctum sanctorum. And you wonder what they talk about. Well, now you know what they talked about the other day. They said, who got sued? What are the interesting cases around the corner?
This lunch agenda is predetermined. Yeah.
We all got sued. The judges said to each other at the judges' lunch. The government asked to have all of them should be recused. They should bring in a district judge from within that's the Fourth Circuit. They should bring in a different district judge from somewhere else within the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit, Maryland's one of the few liberal places. So I think that meant to bring in somebody from Virginia. It's, that circuit is Maryland, Virginia. So bring in a Virginia judge who maybe is more receptive. And, that's where they don't like the rulings that they're getting in Maryland. That's where Abrego Garcia is from. That's Boasberg's district. I'm pretty sure. Maybe he's Washington, D.C. Maybe I'm wrong. But there's the one in Baltimore. There's the woman in Baltimore. I always mispronounce her name. But the reason the administration is losing in the Fourth Circuit is because their positions are legally incorrect. And these judges, this Boasberg, for instance, who ruled against them on the flight, wanted to know when the flight took off and how could that be a state secret when a flight took off from within the United States to go to El Salvador. He's an old friend of Kavanaugh's from Yale. He's not he's not some wild-eyed liberal the way that Trump tried to depict him. But the issue there, just the legal issue, which I think is going nowhere. Instead of each judge having to grant a stay when someone comes to court, there's a court rule. And there are some of those things like that. We had court rules when I was an assistant U.S. attorney among all the judges, like certain things on discovery. You have to do it this way in every courtroom. The judges have all decided. Instead of having to issue an order right away in every case, there'd be a standing order. So there was a standing order in Maryland district that no one could be deported except on 24 hours notice. So they couldn't pick somebody up the ice and suddenly deport them in the middle of the night. They couldn't send somebody to Louisiana on 3 hours notice and say, hey, they can't have their case heard in Maryland. They have to go to Louisiana because now we transported them to Louisiana. We just changed the venue like that with an airplane 3 hours into the case. So for 24 hours, it said the government and ICE can't make waves. So at least it preserved the status quo for 24 hours. They say that rule, to have such a rule for 24 hours to preserve the status quo and bring the matter into court, that greatly impinges, Mark, on executive prerogatives. No, it doesn't.
Well, it's a zero tolerance game is what they're going on. I mean, they're sending the message the same way messages have been sent with the deliberate cruelty to which you've referred in this conversation. There is a message being sent to the judiciary, through the appeals court system, on down the way. This administration is sending a message. Don't you think? They're saying, if you screw with us, or in the words of the president, if you F with us, we will come after you. We are suing all of you judges. That's how much we are coming after you.
But, Mark, the reality is that this is sound and fury signifying nothing, because the president has no power to push around federal judges. They have life tenure. They have wonderful protection in terms of anything physical happening to them. They and their families have wonderful protections. They have lifetime tenure. They're all smart and experienced. They have law clerks who know the law. And so I'll say this about Trump: the people who say he's like a gangster and he likes to threaten. All those judges have had gangsters, real gangsters in front of them. They've had security, they've had murderers come in front of them. They've had all kinds of people who've threatened the judges who've come in front of them. They have security procedures. So really all that he's doing is playing to his base. And it's crazy to antagonize judges. I'll tell you, I'm a litigator. Don't antagonize the judge. I don't care if you're the president. I don't care if you're a criminal defense attorney. Don't antagonize the judge. He's doing this to play to his base. And this is really counterproductive for anything he wants to accomplish, except, of course, the performance of it.
One of the issues that the base is divided over, although it's certainly seen as a right-wing GOP thing, is associated with abortion and abortion care. And there is we can probably lose the federal judges in Maryland because this takes place in South Carolina. It was South Carolina that was defunding Planned Parenthood because of their position on abortion. The state cut funding. Again, this is Medicaid funding in the state of South Carolina. So the Supreme Court in the appeal has just ruled that states can cut Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood. Again, this is in response to Planned Parenthood suing South Carolina over pulling their Medicaid funding. It was a 6-3 vote with the court's liberal justices again dissenting. And the lower court had previously ruled that Planned Parenthood could move forward with this lawsuit. They could sue to get those Medicaid funds.
Well, I'm not sure what all the Medicaid regulations are and whether under the Medicaid regulations they technically can cut that money. I think Planned Parenthood only spends 5 or 10% at most of its money on anything having to do with abortion, and the rest is something that every woman and every man in America would be happy that they're doing, right, left, or center, to help mainly women in all kinds of things that they need. But because of that 5 or 10% of the funding that goes to abortion, they've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, if you'll excuse the expression, in these super right-wing states. And it's just, attack Planned Parenthood, defund Planned Parenthood. Beyond the Medicaid regulations, before Roe v. Wade was overturned, right, with Dobbs, there would have been maybe rights under Roe v. Wade. I don't remember all the arcane law under Roe v. Wade, but it's all gone. It's all gone now because of Dobbs. And so I suppose that's just the way it is, and that women have to live somewhere other than South Carolina or get funding from somewhere else. I mean, it's just terrible from a policy point of view. I imagine, I haven't read the case yet, but I imagine I'd agree with the 3 liberals, as I often do. And there's 6 that are always voting against them, aren't there?
I want to move quickly to Mike Johnson, who is suggesting this week there's a big controversy after the decision to drop the powerful ordinances on Iran to derail their nuclear program, etc. It was done without congressional approval. In fact, as we learned later, there were Republican leaders who were informed of this plan. Democrats were left completely out of the process, but there was certainly, beyond that, no vote and no, okay. So, and again, I'd suggest that sort of is the state of the state these days in Washington. Obama did it to an extent. So in any case, Mike Johnson is suggesting that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. And so again, there's been GOP and Democratic cries to, remember the War Powers Act. You need to come to Congress if you want to do this kind of thing, Mr. President. But he has rejected any calls to stage any vote on a war powers resolution. And I wonder if you could just comment on, from a practical standpoint, war powers and Johnson's position, which is that it's unconstitutional, the War Powers Act.
Well, I think it's likely that the U.S. Supreme Court would stay away from deciding anything about this, saying it's a political question. This seems to me, if there's anything that the U.S. Supreme Court would say is a political question, it's on a particular decision. And of course, the Supreme Court's not really made for this kind of thing, even if it was a Supreme Court that I agreed with more philosophically, because it's after the fact. Within 60 days, I think that the power only, there's some 60-day limit to it, because I think one of the arguments, Mark, is that they don't really need to do anything right now because the certain powers are extinguished after 60 days. And you take the situation, do I think it's unconstitutional? It's very hard to say. I've said so far, I don't think the U.S. Supreme Court is going to get anywhere near the question. It does say in the Constitution that Congress has the power to declare war. So the way they've gotten around that is that they never declare war. The president just takes a police action. Vietnam War, we always call it, but it was deemed a police action at the time. It was not deemed a war at the time. There was all this clamoring that there should have been some kind of a decision. There was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. There had been an attack on a ship out in the Gulf, and LBJ had basically started the Vietnam police action and escalated it all the way through. There never was a declaration of war. Now, of course, one thing that Congress can do better than the War Powers Act is to defund the war. They have the power of the purse. So all they need to do is to say, we're not going to pay for it. But that's, again, way too dramatic, to suddenly, if they had the votes to do it, to say, we want to make it clear we're not paying for those bunker busting bombs to be sent over there. Just imagine the look of that, Mark. So they try to do something about the president's unilateral power with the War Powers Act, when, of course, defunding it would actually work. And the War Powers Act, whether it's constitutional or not, I imagine a situation that came up with Iran. The president's argument was that by pretending that he was going to make peace, it was kind of like a little bit his Pearl Harbor, wasn't it? He looked like he was in peace negotiations. He lulled the other side. He had all those Iranian generals apparently sleeping in their own beds and not in their safe houses. And let's say he killed the top 10 or 15% of the Iranian military leadership. What court is going to say that violated anything, that he had to tell the Democrats? There wasn't going to be a vote to have any kind of a vote. It could be like intelligence, Mark, where you tell the head of the intelligence committee on the Democrats and the Republicans, but then he or she has to keep it totally secret, can't even tell their colleagues. Imagine if something like that leaked. There's a great cartoon where they said, who is it, Hegseth or the other guy, the head of national security, Waltz, they said, thanks for not leaking this one like you did the last one. But the fear of a leak, I just don't see. I mean, Mark, do you see a court saying that that was somehow illegal? That strike on the
No, as I say, Obama did it. I mean, this is to me, it's this. There's always the cry after all of these, and again, you can go back to Obama's presidency as well, just to pick a Democrat, and you can always find the cry to come to Congress if you want approval to do this. There has to be the people's house needs to vote on this. But the reality is,
if you mean what Obama did with Osama bin Laden, that's to me a little bit like the Iranian thing just now. Presidents of different parties. I just don't see where the fear of either one of those leaking was so overwhelming. You just wonder who on earth should have been told and who on earth could have been trusted to keep that secret and not have it leak. And they were limited, Mark. I know, dropping those Buster bombs. I mean, that we go halfway around the world to think how far away that is. Okay, this is not even China and Taiwan. We're going halfway around the world to spend this huge amount of money and effort to bomb those sites. And the head of that, the head of the defense intelligence, that Tulsi Gabbard, I never agreed with her before in my entire life, but she said in public testimony under oath that Iran was not near weaponizing a nuclear bomb, not near. And then Trump says, I don't care what she says. So, I mean, this whole thing was absolutely outrageous from a policy point of view. Don't get me wrong on this, but it seems to me that one limited thing, okay, because it had to happen really quick. And now you can say, well, okay, the other raid with the generals, where they caught the generals by surprise and some of them, that was one thing. But this thing about bombing, they wouldn't have had enough time to move anything significant out of there. But who knows? If the debate had taken 2 weeks and you find out later, right, that they had moved the uranium, right? The uranium that really mattered, that it had been there, had he hit it then, and had it been moved afterwards, the Democrats would never live that down, right?
I'm not convinced the uranium was there to begin with. So to me, this is all moot. And you make a good point if the uranium was there, but I'm not so sure it was. And I wasn't talking about Osama bin Laden. I wasn't talking about leaks. I was talking about the repeated drone strikes under the Obama administration. Just to be clear about what I was talking about, he did it in Yemen. He did it in Pakistan. These drone strikes, they were completely off the books, man. They never went to anybody in Congress about those. So this isn't an issue of secrecy. To me, it was an issue of executive power. But as I say, that horse is out of the barn. I mean, Bush did it, Obama did it, and again, I'm not talking about bin Laden, and Trump is doing it too. And I don't think that there are a lot of reasons maybe to raise hell about this, whether or not it was justified. And you've just raised a legitimate point about Tulsi Gabbard, but the legal part of it, or the parliamentary part of what should be done, I don't think is legit. I can't let this conversation end, David. We're running so late before I get to what is critical. So many people are asking the questions that we've asked day after day on this show. We imply it or we ask it outright, and I'm going to ask it outright to you right now. Is there any legal high ground that anyone has in pushing back on these, quote, ICE agents and these detention agents as they round people up the way they have in masks, so you have no idea who they are, without identification, no idea from what agency they are coming, and no badge number or other ID to indicate same. Where do we land legally on this issue?
By the way, Mark, I hadn't focused on that. You were asking about Osama and the drone strikes. Absolutely, there should have been legal action about that, whether they won or not. That should have been opposed much more, because it was strong. And I was thinking more about Osama bin Laden and that raid.
Sure. Yeah.
Regarding the masks and all of that, this idea that people can run around with masks and you really don't know whether it's a gang abducting you or whether it's ICE, that is totally wrong. And apparently even Bondi has said that she's going to do something about that. So that should absolutely be curtailed. And I've said this before, the fact that the local officials, there's no reason they can't be involved in this. If they hear that something is going on, people should call 911 right away, as soon as they see masked people, as soon as they see people without identification, and say, look, I don't know if this is ICE again, or if this is some police, I'm sorry, this is some criminal gang, but police, get over here right now. And the police and the sheriffs ought to take this seriously. We're a very democratic area. And this should be a serious thing to make sure that they are exactly who they say they are, and that they're not these what appear to be abductions. But beyond that, Mark, what can people do, like, legally about it? I think some people are doing a kind of a self-help. I don't blame these people who aren't going into work, Mark. I mean, there was a story about a lady. She makes $50 a day selling, tamales. And she says to herself, I'm going to figure out the days that I think it's most likely that ICE will be out. It's kind of a rational thing. Don't go to the car wash. I mean, you just hope that this will abate, that they'll go on to something else. Times change, and do everything you can not to get yourself arrested. I know it's easy for me to say because I don't need that $50, from selling tamales tomorrow. That's certainly one thing, and people should just, obviously, I mean, they're taking great care, they're being careful, and of course they're suffering a lot. They're not going to a graduation that they want to go to. They're not going to some other important event. They're not going to church on Sunday. That's a terrible thing for a person of faith. But I think that's about all that can be done. Vote in every election you can, and vote for Democrats. And I'll be partisan about it. This doesn't happen under Democrats, and shouldn't happen under in our democratic city. And let the government bring its federal lawsuits. Let them go to federal court. Let everything be contested, Mark. The idea that, well, they may win in federal court, good, but litigate it. There's also a lot of groups, Mark. Let me say one last thing. There's a lot of groups that are really doing everything they can to try to help the immigrants, and contribute to them and contribute time to them and help them in any way that you can, so we can stop what's going on here, because it's inhuman.
Question for David: do I have to follow orders from a supposed ICE agent who refuses to display a badge or identify himself? This is the problem. They have weapons. They say they're legally empowered to detain you, but they don't display a badge or even identify themselves in any way.
I mean, you have to figure out the percentage. It probably is ICE, unmasked and without their ID. It's probably not a gang abducting, you in the middle of the day. If it's me, it's a gang abducting me in the middle of the day. There's also a lot of racial profiling. But if you're Hispanic and you look like the kind of person that they're racially profiling, and you don't have papers and you have other problems, don't argue and fight with them, because you'll just escalate it. Everybody knows that. You'll get beaten up. You see that poor guy who's the father of 3 Marines who served this country, the weed whacker guy. All he's doing is running away with his weed whacker, and they claim that he assaulted them. If they really bring those cases in the U.S. District Court here, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, every case was righteous. I mean, of course, I was a prosecutor, I thought that, but I looked around at other people's cases too. The cases were righteous. We were not prosecuting innocent people. This seems like an innocent person being prosecuted in federal
this is
court.
a
What a disgrace. What a disgrace.
Heartbreaking example and a disgrace. He is a 50-something-year-old grandfather beaten down by these guys. I don't know if they're ICE or what the hell they are. I think there is a posse. I think it's I don't know. I mean, but you don't show any ID. You don't show your face. You remind me of Klansmen chasing down people in the South and the horrors that were wrought there. And let me just speak to the 50-something-year-old guy with the weed whacker to whom you've referred. He was taken to a place where there are 70-some-odd guys in a small area, one toilet. He was beaten. I mean, you saw the way he was beaten. And no medical attention. He's received little or no food or water. I mean, this is the situation that these guys find themselves in. So as they await trial, like as you say, you talk about the legal and you talk about, as he awaits trial, the guy could die. I mean, easily. I don't know what's going on inside of him, internal bleeding and all the rest. This is an absolute horror show that's being perpetrated on the streets of Los Angeles and America. It's wrong. Now, if people are legitimately in violation of the law and should be arrested and detained, that's one thing. But this is not that. This is something totally wrong.
Well, Mark, on Spanish language radio, they've had some calls that were made from the women's jails. There's one, I guess, out in Adelanto, north of Los Angeles. And the lady calls up her daughter and is explaining to her on the phone what the conditions are. And they're horrible. She's practically freezing to death. I mean, we spend all this money on everything in the United States of America. We can't heat the jail to the point, or cool the jail down to the point that it's not, insufferably hot or cold. We can't give the person a blanket. I mean, this is This is just sort of cruelty for its own sake. And as I say, 95% of them have no criminal records. They're gardeners, they're busboys, they're nannies. This is such a blight on America. And as I say, the people who voted, the MAGA voters, suppose he was going to run around and send all these heroes in to break up the gangs and fight tough people. They're going to take these gangs out. They're going to shoot it out if necessary with, what was that gang that they talked about all the time in Colorado that took over apartment complexes and stuff like that? Where's the people who take over apartment complexes? Where's the drug kingpins? They're just going after all of these incredibly vulnerable people who are hardworking. And but like I said, what goes around comes around, Mark. I'm very optimistic about the next election. And I know you say some of those people that are freezing in jail or that are beaten so badly. I mean, this was on a scale of, I mean, the beating here. But we're going to know, Mark, I said that too. We're going to know who those people are. It's not like it's going to be a secret for a long time. There's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be discovery. They're going to find out who was there. What do they say about criminals? You can run, but you can't hide. If you're a criminal with a badge, you can run, but you can't hide. We're going to know who committed these civil rights violations.
Well,
Mark.
Multistacker agrees with you. ICE identity issue. Make the, quote, deputized agent wear an ankle bracelet. Track the masked guys after an incident and issue outer vests with a department number displayed. Track them. Love your show.
We don't have the power. We don't have the power to impose that right now.
Yeah,
the government has if we had the House or we had something like that, if that was the condition to get some new bill passed that they had to wear that. But where's the impetus going to come from except from the populace and from the Democratic areas, which LA is the Democratic area? Oh, this is an interesting one. So,
well, you've already issued your Katz-Adamus on this birthright citizenship case. Randy says SCOTUS decision on birthright citizenship case due tomorrow, right? And that is.
Did he say how he knows it's tomorrow?
I don't know how he knows it. Randy knows a lot of stuff.
Well, the Supreme Court has until July 4th to issue its decision. So there will be some decisions next week. So I'm just wondering how he knows that one's going to come tomorrow.
Yeah, but you've already said you believe that they'll uphold birthright citizenship. Katz-Adamus is on the record with that.
Yeah, I think that one could be 9-0. At the worst, it'll be 7-2, and Alito and Thomas will come up with some fanciful theory.
We could try ignoring it, sir.
No, I don't.
It says born in the United States right in the Constitution. Read the language.
I come from regular stock.
Yeah. That's
Clarence, read the text, please.
Clarence, get it on, baby. Get it together. He's too busy in that big, beautiful RV that was bought for him. All right, David, I've got to wrap up. I love our conversation.
What time is your show tonight?
We're starting at 6:30 Pacific time. Are you going to visit with us? We're on for 2 hours.
I'm going to check in at 6:30, but then I have to leave around 6:45, 7 at the latest. But yeah, 6:30, I'll check in. I'm looking.
Sounds like it's going to start hot. I think a lot of people are going to drop in. A lot of special guests like yourself are going to drop in right at the beginning. So that's really exciting news. Thank you for being here every Thursday. Appreciate it. And we'll see you tonight. David Katz, everybody.
Great. Just check in like this at 6:30, right? Like I am right now. Check in.
Yeah, we'll send you a Zoom link. We'll send you a special Zoom link. Okay. So
great.
yeah.
Great to be with you.
Okay, pal. See you.
Care.
Be well. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.